Hello, everybody. I'm Sophia Hafner, a research assistant here at the Oxford Internet Institute. To everybody online and also in the room, welcome to the annual OII Pride lecture. We are very delighted to have two speakers today, starting with Queer Joy as a Digital Good, Centering Joy in Research by Dr. Madeleine Steeds, who we have here. Dr. Steeds will discuss how queer joy is expressed in online spaces and the barriers to that expression. Dr. Madeleine Steeds is an assistant professor in the School of Information and Communication Studies at the University College Dublin. Their research explores how identities are expressed online. They're also interested in how identity is assigned to technology and how associations made with these identities bias cognitive processes. I'd like to thank the OII committee for supporting this event and also Wadham College for hosting us here. The presentation will run for about 30 to 40 minutes, followed by discussion at the end. For your awareness, this event is being recorded and will be posted on our website following the event. We will stop the recording before the Q&A to allow for open conversation. We will take any online questions at the end of the talk and will then end the Zoom for questions in the room. So if joining online, please be sure to add any questions to the Q&A before the talk ends, so we will have time to answer them. Those in the room, save your questions until the end, and Madeleine will answer them after the talk. Madeleine's talk will be followed by a coffee break, and we will then be joined by our second speaker, Dr. Rebecca Swift, for visual depictions of gender. Is advertising imagery getting any better? After this, we welcome you to join us in the antechapel for drinks and some nibbles. Exciting. It's great to have you here, Madeleine, and I'll hand it over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you. I said I'm Madeleine Steeds, and I'm based at University College Dublin, and I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you about queer joy as a digital good and centering joy in research. So some of the work I'm going to discuss was supported by the ESRC Digital Good Network, and it was done in collaboration with my lovely colleagues whose names and institutions you can see at the bottom of this slide. They've been a really supportive team to work with, and they've been so helpful in helping me prepare this talk, as well as just generally being really supportive anytime we do anything. So a really big thank you to them. So I was going to start by just telling you a little bit about myself. So I'm gender fluid, which means on different days I might use different pronouns. Generally, they, them is a safe bet because otherwise it gets very confusing, which is sometimes fun, sometimes a bit needlessly complicated, but alas, it is who I am. But I grew up in the countryside around Bristol in England. And when I was growing up, I actually really wanted to be an actor. And so my mum would always tell me, you can't be an actor. There's way too much rejection. It's going to make you really sad. So I was like, you're right, Mum. At 15, I decided to be a researcher instead. Ended up being lots of rejection, but I am very happy that I did go into that because I think on balance, I am getting paid a little bit more by doing this career. So then at 15, I was particularly interested in psychology as a discipline. So I moved to the University of Leeds to study my undergrad and master's in psychology. And while I was there, I was quite a typical nerdy teenager, and I was really into video games. And I really wanted a virtual reality headset, but I was a poor student and I couldn't afford one. So I had a genius plan. I could do my master's thesis on something that uses VR, then I can hang out in their basement and use their VR headset to play games. So that's exactly what I did. I spent a lovely summer hanging out in the basement of the Leeds psychology department playing games. But I also did my thesis on looking at how virtual reality might be able to improve memory in older adults. And that took me down this quite interesting line of research, understanding how technology can interact with psychology and influence our cognition and behaviors. So following this kind of line of research, I ended up doing my PhD at the University of Manchester, and that was in the Department of Computer Science. I am terrible at computer science, but I found I can kind of do human-computer interaction. So that's ended up being my sort of main field of study now. So yeah, did my PhD there, and then after a brief stint of teaching in the School of Education at the University of York, I moved to University College Dublin, where I did my postdoc with the business school. Don't really know much about business, but they had me there for a year. It's very nice. And then eventually I moved on to become an assistant professor in information and communication studies, where I mainly teach on the human-computer interaction master's program. So as you could probably tell by my history of departments, I do a lot of very interdisciplinary research, and a lot of the time I never quite know exactly where I fit. I just kind of follow a whim and it works out. But my first love was always really looking at cognitive abilities, and in particular looking at cognitive offloading. So how we offload information like phone numbers to technology, and then how that impacts how well we can remember them later down the line. But I was also quite interested in the idea of processing biases. So for my PhD, I was looking at what stereotypes and associations do we hold with our technology, and does that then influence the kind of information that we pay attention to or remember from those devices? So I got quite into that kind of social psychology element of stereotype research, and that very fortuitously led me to gendered AI. Where that's been quite a good area of research because AI has gotten very popular. So I was quite lucky that worked out. And within that, I've been interested in how societal stereotypes might be influenced by interacting with gendered AI, but also how we assign identity to these technologies. And I'm very lucky that I've been made a permanent assistant professor at UCD, and that's kind of given me a bit of wiggle room to do the research which maybe has less impact, but I find amazing and I have a lot of fun doing. So I want to share with you one of my favorite projects that I've ever done, which brought me a lot of joy, which was looking at these little robots. So that's a robot lawnmower and a robot vacuum cleaner. And I find these particularly interesting because they kind of represent stereotypical masculine and feminine domestic chores. So I was interested in what happens if you make them super cute and put little bows on their heads. There was some like academic logic to that, but it was largely, I think this is really cute. But I wanted to go further than just putting them up kind of on where you might imagine their heads. So I gave them adorable little bow ties as well. If you can imagine that that's their necks, then they look very dapper. So in this research, I was then interested in what other people thought of these beautiful creations. And so we did some word association with participants. So this top row is the words that were associated with the lawnmowers, bottom row is the vacuum cleaners, and then first column is no outfit, second column is bow tie, and the third column is the hair bow. I call them that because of where I place them. I've had some reviewers be like, oh, Roombas don't have necks, so I don't know what you're doing. We're getting there. But yeah, so there were some interesting associations that people kind of generated from this. And in particular, when a robot vacuum cleaner had either a bow tie or a hair bow, people agreed with me that this was very cute. And so the word cute was generated. I was personally very offended that no one found my little lawnmower cute. That for some reason didn't come up, but we got aggressive, which I think was quite insulting. So there were quite mixed perceptions of this. And to an extent, this was just a fun side project for me. Hopefully one day it'll get published, but I never know. But this led to me kind of exploring more elements around identity and also things that I find very fun and joyful. So I got kind of into this realm of how do we present ourselves in online spaces? And in particular, I'm hoping to do some work around like non-binary avatars and how we present those. I was told I'd hear back from the funding agency in May. It's now June, so fingers crossed, this is my month. The other project around self-presentation that I've been really fortunate to work on was looking at this idea of queer joy. So a lot of people have kind of said to me, why would you study that? It's not a real thing. In fact, one of our own participants said, when asked what is queer joy, I can't believe this is a serious question that a serious person would research. There's no such thing as queer joy. And one, I don't think I'm very serious, so that was kind of fair. But two, it kind of reminds me of a quote that's often misattributed to Oscar Wilde. It was actually a paraphrasing of Oscar Wilde's quote by a guy that's kind of hated him. But anyway, the quote, I went down a whole Google rabbit hole on this. I was trying to figure out what to say. But basically the quote is, life is too important to be taken so seriously. And I think that's really important because if we're only dealing in the serious, actually things can get very depressing and scary. And so it's important to find joy in what we're doing. And myself and my colleagues are by no means the first people to research this topic. We were very inspired by work around Black joy and this notion that joy is a form of resistance against oppression. So I've said joy quite a few times, but I've not really tried to define it. But essentially, joy generally is just used as a synonym for happy, but that always implies that it can only exist in the absence of sadness. And that's not really true. A lot of the times we'll be happy or joyful despite adversity, or in response to adversity, finding joy is very important. And so we, in our research, we're quite interested in the notion of joy is resistance, which leads me to this quote by Hacknet in 2017, which was posted to Twitter. And this is quoted from an article by Lewin Steele. But they said, joy is resistance. Oppression doesn't have room for your happiness. You resist when you find joy anyhow. So that's really the kind of idea that we went into our project Queer Joy as a Digital Good with. For me personally, I've kind of indicated that I generally would say I do human-computer interaction. And within that field, we have queer human-computer interaction, or queer HCI. And within that, queer is used as an inclusive term for non-normative sexualities and genders, so identities and sexualities that are outside of kind of cissexual and straight. But it's also used to include research that has elements which challenge normalization. So going against what's considered normal and the standard within society. But within HCI, a lot of the literature around queer people still centers marginalization and harm and the negative experiences that we encounter as queer people. And then it goes on to try and figure out how do we counter these negative experiences. But there's a lack of research which is focusing on the many beautiful and positive experiences that we have every day as queer people. So following a workshop at the British HCI conference, myself and some collaborators got together to discuss our perspectives as researchers on joy and queerness within HCI. So this was a paper published in the Alt-Chi track of the Chi conference, which some of you may be familiar with. There's a big conference in human-computer interaction. And we kind of discussed our personal perspectives on what we think we mean by queer joy. So this is a beautiful diagram that was made by, I think, our lead author, Molly, who is amazing. You should definitely check out their work. And we kind of discussed what elements make up queer joy. So we had elements like expression, so it being political, being intimate, and there being a fluidity in our identities. But there's also elements around creativity. So queer joy can be transformative and it can be performative. And then it can also be subversive. So within that, it can be kind of messy and experimental. And a lot of our joy is reactive. So it comes out of other experiences we've had, whether they were kind of fun, combative, and a lot of the time, these kind of experiences of queer joy can be quite healing. And then, of course, there's the element of solidarity, and we particularly focused in this paper around sort of intersectional perceptions of queer joy. So yeah, how it relates to Black joy, crip joy, which focuses on kind of disability and accessibility. And within that, there's then a lot of community and pride. So this is kind of a high-level summary of some of our thoughts. I'll just share the bit of the paper that kind of I found I resonated with the most. Was we were talking about kind of doing research not for impact, not for economic gain or profitability, but for curiosity and just wanting to know the answers to questions because we're curious and we want to have fun with it. And again, that's kind of the attitude I have when I'm sticking bows on things. But I think there's a lot of brilliant research that can be done if we stop being quite as restrained by the need to show that what we're doing is going to be profitable or is going to change all of society. Like, not everything has to be groundbreaking. So this then leads me to the question of, well, what do people who aren't researchers think of queer joy? And so this is the project we did, as we called it, Queer Joy as a Digital Good, and it was funded by the ESRC Digital Good Network. These are all my fabulous collaborators who are, again, just amazing people, and I definitely say check out their work individually as well. It was really nice because we were a very interdisciplinary team. So a few of us came from the more computing backgrounds. We had artists involved, digital humanities, and we all got to come together and really try and figure out how we can best explore this idea of queer joy. And as a kind of experience of working on research, it was really nice because we'd all kind of get together and it didn't feel like work. It just felt like we were kind of getting together and with a group of friends and just having a really nice time discussing possibilities. This work also got a fair amount of media attention. So our collaborator, Alice Wilson, wrote these fantastic articles for like Diva, The Conversation, and The Egalitarian. And a lot of these were kind of reflecting on the experiences of working in our kind of interdisciplinary, very queer and supportive team. And so, if you're interested in kind of those experiences, then check out these articles. But for the rest of the talk, I'm mainly going to be focusing on this specific paper and the data we collected from an online survey. So this paper is called Queer Joy on Social Media, Exploring the Expression and Facilitation of Queer Joy in Online Platforms. And this was also published at the CHI conference this year, and it won an honorable mention award, which means it's like in the top 5% of papers, so I like to brag about that. Yeah, it was a really great experience getting to go and present this at the conference. So for this work, we had 4 major research questions. I'm not going to go through kind of the results of all of them because I would literally be here all day. But I'm going to mainly focus on how queer joy was defined by our participants, what it looked like in online spaces, and also the elements of how it's like kind of engaged with and seen in social media spaces. So social media is a really interesting context for this work, not just because I'm interested in computers, but because when we're on social media platforms, we portray different elements of ourselves depending on kind of what platform we're on and what we're trying to achieve with it. So this meme was posted by Dolly Parton, and it shows kind of how she would present herself on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and Tinder. And I think it's a very nice summary of the way that we forward different elements of our identity, depending on what platform we're using and what audience we're kind of engaging with. And this is really important for queer people in particular because of this idea of selective visibility, where sometimes if we're in a supportive community, we're going to feel much more comfortable to forward the kind of queer elements of our identity, whereas in less supportive environments, then we're going to choose to not be visible for various reasons. So within this context, we asked participants what they thought queer joy was. And we had 5 major themes. The first one was self-expression. And within that, there were loads of sub-themes, but self-expression was a really key element of queer joy. One of the sub-themes was authenticity. So participant 29 said that existing and living authentically and happily as oneself in a heteronormative world is what they consider queer joy to be. Another participant highlighted celebrating the sexuality part of being queer too. Queer joy shouldn't be sanitized and desexualized or depoliticized. And I think in the current political climate, that's very important. There's a lot of push to just kind of, say, well, we should be able to see gay and queer people in society. We shouldn't have books about LGBT people in the library. It shouldn't be involved in curriculums. And by doing that, we force people to remain hidden and make it seem like being queer is something to hide and be ashamed of. Whereas actually, we shouldn't be afraid to highlight all the elements of queerness and sanitize it for other people's perspectives. I will just note here as well, when we collected this data, it was at the beginning of 2024. So it was a fairly different political climate to what we're currently in now. It was pre-Trump's re-election and pre the kind of mass exit from Twitter. So just bear that in mind when we're kind of going through some of the results. There has been a decent shift in situations since then. But another interesting sub-theme in self-expression was actually the idea of inauthenticity and attention seeking. So participant 87 said about queer joy, an irritating person capitalizing on a minor aspect of their identity and using it to get attention online. So while all our participants had identified through prolific as being LGBT, there was quite a mix in terms of their attitudes towards how much we should kind of center our own queerness in these platforms. And I think this kind of quote actually gives an interesting insight into some ideas around algorithmic bias, because a lot of queer content creators will gain traction by forwarding the queer elements of their identity. But when they stop forwarding that as much and focus on other elements of themselves, they get punished by the algorithm and their content is no longer promoted. And that then forces people to only highlight one element of their identity rather than allowing them to be kind of full 3D people. Yeah. So then I'll move on now to another major theme, which was probably unsurprisingly community. So one of the points was happiness in community. So queer people succeeding and being happy, seeing that and sharing that feeling of joy with them was highlighted as being important. And again, I find this interesting because even though our participants were all from the UK and Ireland, and that's kind of a generally individualist society, actually within the queer community, this collectivist mindset of us all celebrating and supporting each other was really highlighted in queer joy. Another kind of interesting quote was around freedom. So being able to live how you want to live with whoever you love. And having that option to be visible and proud in that regard was seen as important to queer joy. So I'm not going to skip over safety and role models and representation, though there were some interesting things around there, but I'm going to focus on discomfort and uncertainty around terminology, which is another one of our themes. So there were some people that said, I don't know what this term is. I guess it means the joy of being queer, which is a very fair way to define queer joy. Yeah, so for some of our participants, they actually just hadn't really come across this kind of concept and didn't really know what to make of it. But others were fairly turned off by this concept. So participant 75 said, it seems a bit of a slur on the one hand, or a wannabe term on the other. And I think for us in kind of an academic context, this really highlights that while within like HCI, we've embraced this idea of queer HCI and used queerness a lot as a term, there's still a significant proportion of the community which does not feel comfortable and has not felt that they've reclaimed the term. So when we're centering our research, we want to make sure that we aren't inadvertently alienating people by terming it this way. So I am always kind of curious, because when we ran this study online via Prolific, and the title of it was just like queer joy, and I think the word queer was used like 20 times. So kind of wonder if we change that to LGBTQ+, how would those responses have changed? So maybe that's something to follow up with. Yeah. In terms of now looking more specifically at the online context, we asked people if they could like give an example of a queer joy thing that they posted. And the majority of our participants indicated that they had never posted about queer joy on social media. And this was a kind of sad part of the data set to code. So I went through the open responses to this and had a repry. But there was quite a lot of people that said that they didn't post about queer joy because they were afraid that their family would see it and disown them. And so I think it's kind of, you know, a terrible thing that people are afraid to express happiness and joy out of fear of other people hating them for it. But I am going to focus a little bit more on the happy stuff because it's Pride Month, and focus on our participants who did post about queer joy. So one of them, within the theme of relational joy, said that they'd made a post with their partner celebrating their love. And this was quite a common post, just people being together and being happy. Interestingly, there was also one participant who said that they hadn't intentionally posted queer joy, but they did post their wedding photos and they hoped that would make someone happy. So there was kind of a mix in at least what people actually considered queer joy, a queer joy post to be. Another nice one was in the theme of affirmation and representation. So participant 42 said that they posted a screenshot of a voice app showing that their voice was firmly in the male masculine range, which I think is a nice way to highlight how technology can be used in gender affirming settings and really promote gender euphoria instead of gender dysphoria, which is often what the kind of focus of the trans experience is. So this participant indicated that they posted this screenshot to Reddit, and the specific platforms is another element that we were quite interested in. So this is a graph showing how our participants ranked different social media platforms based on the extent they perceived that platform to facilitate queer joy. So the green dots, which you can hopefully see, were representative of the default rank we gave those platforms because of how we ran the study. It was easier for analysis for everything to start in the same place. And then the bars indicate the mean placement. We found some interesting trends where the more visual platforms like Instagram, Tumblr, and TikTok were rated as better for facilitating queer joy than the more text-based apps like X, Facebook, Threads, Blue Sky. So there is a bit of a trend there in which platforms people see as facilitating queer joy. And we also gave people the option to specify another social media app that we hadn't thought of. Only one person used this option, and the app was Grindr. So we dug a little bit more into why people felt this way about these different platforms. And to an extent, it was to do with general usage patterns. So you'll probably experience this, that you have a friend or a group of friends that are like, we only communicate through this platform and that's what we do and we're never going to change it. So a lot of people were just like, that's what my friends do, which is straightforward enough. But we also had a major theme of the audience and who was going to be receiving these posts. And in particular, the platform was highlighted as a key consideration. So we had quotes like, "I would never post in an environment that didn't feel inclusive. X, for instance, is so unwelcoming that I would never post there." And interestingly, I think the majority of quotes that specifically named a platform named either X, Twitter, or Elon Musk specifically. And again, this was kind of pre the end of 2024 mass exodus from Twitter, but they're already, sorry, throwing things now. There's already this kind of awareness of the kind of corporate entity that owned these platforms and whether or not it was suitable for the community. So this slide was just kind of summarizing the main findings from the paper, and I'm not going to go into it in too much detail. If you are interested, then please read the full paper. But the main consideration I want to kind of highlight is that in our questions, we were always focusing on queer joy, except for a few questions that specifically related to privacy. It was like, I think pretty much every question had the word queer joy in it. And even though we centered joy in this research, we still got answers that gave us insight into a lot of different elements that are of interest in research. So we got indications about privacy, social media use behaviors, all these different things that researchers study, but center harm and marginalization in. So if you take one thing from everything I'm saying, it's that, you know, putting a positive spin on your research is still going to gain valuable insights. But I think this is sort of reflective of a wider problem we have in society, where we have TV shows, films, and other forms of media that focus on the trope of queerness being a tragedy. We have unrequited love stories, all these tragic backgrounds. There's the bury your gays trope, where every queer character is eventually going to get killed off. And that's something that's been criticized in the media. But this is still the trope that we're portraying in our research. And that has an effect on the wider society. So I would say we need to move away from that trope and actually focus on the positives and you know, great things that can happen from being a queer person living in the world. But in the current research landscape, I accept this is probably going to be harder to achieve. This first article is from the end of 2023, where Rishi Sunak's government said they were going to end woke science. He said that not long after we got the Queer Joy grant, and I like to think the two are connected. Probably not, but it does, yeah, would be fun. But since then, you know, things have gotten worse. We've seen Trump's anti-DEI initiatives defunding research and how that is impacting multiple countries. So we need to push back against this kind of move, culture that diversity, equality and inclusion and accessibility aren't worthwhile areas of study. They're incredibly important areas, and just because a group is a minority in society doesn't mean that that's a niche area of research to conduct. It's a very important area, and you know, we should be allocating money in order to explore that. And on top of that as well, I would say we need to move away from kind of the culture that all research must be groundbreaking, bring in tons of money for, you know, various organizations, and instead allow researchers to explore and to not have that pressure to always find something that's going to be headline news tomorrow. Through creative and exploratory research, we can do some really cool things, and I think it's important that we have that academic freedom. Beyond kind of academia and research settings, it's also important to remember that Pride is protest. Pride is inherently political. Our identities are constantly used as political pawns in, you know, the culture wars, and all parties will happily throw LGBTQ+ people under the bus if they think it will further their agenda. So we need to be standing up for queer people. We need to be fighting back against oppression, and we should go away from the narrative that You know, we'll just if every queer person is just quiet and keeps to themselves, then we'll all be left alone, and it's because we're making a spectacle of ourselves that we're being oppressed. That's not true. If we all go and just hide in our houses, then things are only going to get worse. So I think it's very important that we are open and proud and are visible to the research community and wider society. So I will end with this quote from one of our participants who said, "I'm genuinely worried about the direction social media is going in regards to online moderation and the sanitization of queer spaces. We're seeing that many social media platforms are biased, and more often than not, bigotry, sexism, and xenophobia are moderated far less than content creators who are women, gender diverse, queer, and other minorities." And while this quote is about social media, this is again something we're seeing in all areas of society. So when we are faced with this oppression, we need to remember that joy is resistance. And by being happy and living authentically, we can fight back against that. So thank you very much. I hope that was kind of interesting, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Associate Professor in AI and Society at the OII. To everyone online and in the room, welcome back to the OII Pride Lecture. I'm delighted to welcome our second speaker, Dr. Rebecca Swift, for her talk on visual depictions of genders. Is advertising imagery getting any better? The talk will cover the historical view to the present day, sharing the results of Getty Images' multi-year research into depictions of masculinity, the recent research into depictions of the LGBTQ plus community, and how the research is being adopted in commercial practice. Dr. Rebecca Swift is a world-leading creative expert who has pioneered visual insights. A senior vice president, creative at Getty Images, Rebecca directs the company's creative insights and creation of imagery and video used in award-winning advertising, design, and editorial content around the world. Working closely with creators, art directors, and creative researchers globally, Rebecca plays a crucial role in ensuring that Getty Images is continually provided fresh, relevant creative content and insights, which in turn engages and inspires creatives and marketers around the world. Her foresight into cultural and societal trends that shape visual communications drives Getty Images' creative offering. Now, just a little bit of housekeeping and then I'll shut up.
Oh, I was enjoying that.
The presentation will run for about 30-40 minutes, followed by a discussion at the end. For your awareness, this event is being recorded and will be posted on our website following the event. We will stop the recording before the Q&A to allow for open conversation. We'll take any online questions at the end of the talk and will then end the Zoom for questions in the room. So, if joining online, please be sure to add any questions to the Q&A before the talk ends. Those in the room, save your questions until the end, and Rebecca will answer them after the talk. After the talk, we'll welcome you to join us at the Antechapel of Wadham College for drinks and nibbles. It's great to have you here, Rebecca.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. Thank you. Hello. I am going to talk about depictions of gender and the types of conversations that are happening in the industry and within commercial practice in particular. It's really interesting how much of what Maddie's up in the back there. What Maddie was saying is actually reflected in the types of things that we're trying to solve for in the work that we're doing. So I'm not going to give you a deep dive into any particular piece of research. But instead, I'm just going to give you a whirlwind snapshot of what's happening in commercial work right now. There's still a lot of work to do. And this is very annoyingly a rhetorical question. I'm not actually going to give you the answer to that, but I'll let you make your own conclusions based on what I'm going to show you right now. So come on. Oh, it's working. It's not working. Am I? Oh, with this? Yeah. Okay. For those of you that don't know who Getty Images is, we are a global company based in over 100 countries, and we have a creative team which is the team that I run, which is just over 90 people. Scattered across the world, and I'm also incredibly fortunate to be able to do research with commercial backing, and I'm very, very aware of that because a lot of the work that we're doing is kind of based on my PhD, basically, and I'm really interested in how visuals evolve over time in the commercial space, and I'll give you it's worked. So this is kind of our methodology. And again, this is a very kind of salesy, PR-y kind of way of describing our methodology. But this is how we do research at Getty Images. We are looking at hard data, big data. So we have about 2.3 billion searches happening on our site every year. And we have 830 brands who are looking for content, and these are logged in registered users. We have many billions of non-logged in registered users, and I'm sure many of you have done that at some point, and that's absolutely fine. But the data that we have background information on in terms of who it is, where they are, and what kind of company it is, it's about 830,000. And then we obviously can look at what they're looking at, the terms that they're using as they search for content, then how they download, then what they download of that content. And that's all really important in terms of these are businesses mainly who are investing money in visual content. So that's the thing I'm interested in. I'm not interested in interactions, although we do look at interactions. So we'll look at interactions from a commercial sense, what people are looking at, clicking on, maybe even putting into a basket and then not buying. But I'm not in the business of likes. I'm not in the business of kind of, the social media listening. I'm more in the very hard commercial world. And I think that's the important thing about the research that we do. Everything we do has to have an impact. We are working with photographers who expect to make money, and we're working for a business that expects to make money. And we're also selling to businesses that expect to make money from the content that we're creating for them. So, there's many layers of jeopardy in that in terms of how we're choosing and what we're choosing to shoot. We also test our hypothesis. So we build hypothesis from what is happening within our own company and within our own customer set. And then we test that on the general public. So we do consumer surveys 3 times a year. We also do a lot of image testing. So if we're building out a new kind of visual language around a subject, then we will test that content on consumers. We will look at kind of their attitudes towards it, their tolerance for it, and whether they can relate to it in some ways. I never ask the general public, do you like this image? I don't actually care whether they like the image. I want to know that they're gonna look at that image and say, this brand understands me. If I can relate to it, I will be a customer. So it sounds quite hard-nosed, but it really makes the research much more robust. And just in terms of kind of how we analyze content for those that are interested, we use a kind of combination of content analysis, which we can do with AI and also with our own systems. And then we have visual analysts who are using a kind of a semiotics. And again, this kind of goes back to my own PhD, where I was kind of looking at how do you do semiotics on a large scale, and that's what we do at Getty Images. So again, just a kind of insight into how we work as a business. So I've spent most of my career thinking about the depiction of women. As a kind of young woman coming up in this industry, fighting against the patriarchy, wanting to kind of change the world. The one thing that everybody wanted to talk about and was willing to invest in was changing the depiction of women. And what has happened, and especially since 2018, since the Me Too movement, there has been this massive shift of the representation of women, and it's incredibly diverse now. So you have kind of all this intersection with the female gender or with women happening, particularly here. So, we have a broad range of gender expression, race and ethnicity, sexual orientation, body types, which is really, really key, religion, age, and disability. And so I'm not saying that the work here is done. I'm not saying that we're, you know, where we should be, but I think that a lot more has happened with the depiction of women, especially in the commercial space, than focusing in on other genders. So the thing that we've kind of been focusing in on for the last couple of years is actually the depiction of men. So I bet you didn't think you'd come to a Pride presentation and have someone talk to you about depictions of men, but that's exactly what I'm going to do. And there is a really good reason for that, because especially as we're starting to see this pullback, and not necessarily a pullback, you know, a permanent pullback, but a kind of anxiety right now. Now, I can quite confidently say that the work is still being done. It's just not being talked about in the same way that it was before. It was seen as a commercial advantage to talk about promoting the LGBT community, and you know, having a Pride campaign, which a lot of companies did. But what's happening now is that brands are investing in other things like LGBT mental health, or community, community advocates and organisations. So it's kind of, it has shifted. It's just not out there as much, as far as I can see. And I'm not, you know, I'm not saying again that it's enough. I'm just saying that it is still happening. So in terms of the, oh, come on. Stupid technology. So do I need to click that each time? Should I just chuck this?
I think it's just going to sleep. That's
Oh, okay. Sorry, it's too much chatting. So what's been happening, as I say, is this kind of expansive depiction of women has kind of left men behind. And we've seen this, you know, we've seen this in the media. We've seen it in terms of the conversations around men and you know, toxic masculinity and the manosphere, you know, and you know, the lack of focus on young men, especially young straight men, and therefore there has, you know, there's kind of this problem in society that somehow needs to be fixed. But actually, when you look at what's happening, if you look at what has happened in the commercial world, so in advertising over the last 80 years, where we have seen shifts with women over that time, we haven't seen the shifts in depictions of men. And so this is how men were represented when they returned from war in 1945. Yes, we are going back to 1945. This is a historical presentation as well as a contemporary presentation. I promise you I'll go really quickly. So men were seen as kind of these wise, experienced men that have come back from war, they've seen it all, and women should you know, listen to their expertise. I would argue some men still think that. And then coming straight after that with the 50s and then into the 60s, it was very much about getting men back into work. It's really interesting because, again, I've done a lot of studying of the 50s and 60s women, and we've all seen the crazy ads of women in the house. And the focus has been very much on women as housewives, and you know, all of the governments that were involved in the war were trying to persuade women that staying in the house was a good thing, so that they could give the jobs back to men. So we saw a lot of men like this, either going to work or coming back from work, and the women are, you know, very much supporting them. But actually, when you turn it on your head and you start to look at how men are depicted, it's kind of a bit dull and a bit straight, really. You know, they're still in their suits and they're just, you know, coming in and out the house, and all they're doing is working. When it got to the 60s, we started to see the kind of the new frontier, and obviously the space race was happening at this time, but it was very much about men as adventurers and men's kind of, you know, taking us into the next era. And so we saw these kind of rugged men start to appear. We also started to see in the kind of the 70s, the men who were, again, working very, very hard, still in their suits and, again, ties when they're at work, being cared for by the women. But the women start to become a little bit more adoring at this point. So advertising had kind of switched to this. There was always a woman kind of loitering near a man. So again, it was kind of, we're starting to move into the era of women are there to support men as a sexual partner. And then in the 80s, we started to see men actually in this kind of objectified stance, which was kind of the same time that women started to be really objectified. And again, it's really interesting to look at what happened with women at this time and men. It was actually a very, very similar pattern that happened within the advertising industry. So yeah, we started to see men in their underpants. This is where, you know, we started to see the kind of body beautiful with men. Believe it or not, the 1990s was the first time that we saw male friendship. And this Abercrombie & Fitch, which we have learned since was deeply problematic in terms of how these were shot, and the whole business, the whole ecosystem of Abercrombie & Fitch was completely messed up. But they did hit a really interesting kind of moment at that time where they were showing men, yes, they are semi-naked, but they're also, you know, there is a little bit more camaraderie going on there. And then we started to see men as fathers. Again, this is really late. This is into the 90s now, early 90s. So, you know, we think about all of those moments where we have seen women as mothers. We started to see fathers actually having some kind of relationship with children into the 90s. And then the 2000s was kind of the era of the elite athlete and the superhero, which still was very much kind of the dominant advertising image in the 2010s as well. And obviously having the London Olympics here in the UK was really big in terms of having an impact on that. And then, you know, recently is only, I mean, literally is only recently, 2020, when we had the Black Lives Matter protest, was when we started to see different skin tones happening in advertising with men. And then suddenly 2020 happens and poof, all the major brands start, you know, oh gosh, we need to bring in black men. And so, you know, when you start to think about that in terms of how do we see kind of gay men, or, you know, men who are in relationships, or you know, men who are running families, it was only really this campaign, McCain's, I don't know if anyone saw this, from, oh gosh, I can't remember what blooming year it was. I feel like it was 4 years ago, really recently. This had a massive impact in the in our world, in terms of like, oh, finally a consumer packaged good, a food company is actually showing a real family and a fun, you know, they're having fun as in a way that we have not seen before. And then this campaign as well with Daniel Craig. I don't know if you saw this. It's an amazing video of him dancing like a total dad. But it was like, you know, it started this whole conversation around depiction, you know, different male identities, and how do we kind of identify men in these kind of commercial spaces, and how this is so different, especially somebody who played the most macho, patriarchal, misogynistic character in James Bond. And now he was playing this kind of, you know, this guy who's got a much more kind of fluid identity. And again, you know, I wouldn't say that there has been a massive shift since the Belvedere ad, but at least it's something that we can all refer back to and say that was the moment. That's when something really interesting was happening. But the really interesting thing about the depiction of straight men in particular is that anything to do with emotions, anything to do with mental health, anything to do with physical health, actually, that doesn't involve, oh, I've pulled a muscle because I just did 100 miles on my road bike, I don't know why you wouldn't pull that muscle, would you? It's more likely to be that one. It is not actually depicted. And so, you know, actually the depiction of men as having an inner life and thinking about things deeply is really not well represented. And when you start to look at black men or men of colour at all, then you aren't seeing this type of imagery, and gay men not at all depicted in that space. And this is kind of typical of how men have been depicted in the workplace. I think this one's from the 2010s, and I'm really interested in this very kind of standard corporate imagery, which you probably see a lot more of than you actually realise. This is like bread and butter to us. We do a lot of corporate content, and this idea of, you know, being a success in your life and having a whole audience that is listening to you, a bit like me today, is kind of, it was really, really, really key. And then we've started to see this new kind of male co-worker starting to emerge, which is taking on some of the characteristics of you know, moving into kind of sensitivity and emotional intelligence, and you know, dressing in a less kind of male way in terms of you know, the suit and the power suit and the expensive watch. We still see a lot of expensive watches, to be honest, but this kind of very, very pared back way of dressing. And also, you know, placing a man next to a woman seems to be a commercial technique to show that, you know, gets on with women. You know, it's not there just to boss them around. And now I've mentioned it, you'll see it all the time, because it's kind of that affective conditioning, you know, that we talk about in terms of, you know, placing things side by side that you don't even realize that you're processing. But again, you'll see a lot of that. And then, you know, I think what's actually happening in the alcohol world is where a lot of this, well, a lot of really, really interesting work is happening. This is an old Captain Morgan campaign, and Diageo, which is the brand that owns Captain Morgan, they also own Guinness, and Guinness have done some really cool work around changing depictions of men. It's really, really cool. And this is where we kind of started to see some of this work really starting to emerge. So Captain Morgan are kind of thinking about kind of male identity and male representation in much more of a kind of a spectrum. So there isn't one kind of man that you know, goes to the rugby at the weekend or supports a football team or even is a father at the weekend. But there's, you know, there's many different ways of representing male and male identity. But this is literally in the last year. I mean, this is really, really new work, and it's really, really kind of, it's a really, really new evolution. And so I think a lot of kind of what I do when I'm talking to brands is I kind of go, well, here's the last 80 years, and then here's the last 3 years. And what are you going to do about it? You know, it's kind of that kind of confrontation around, well, let's just look at the types of images are being used. And I think the key thing, and then just to refer back to what Maddie said, and thank you for using Unsplash, by the way, Get Images brand. I was checking you had accredited everybody correctly, and you had, so congrats. And what's been happening, especially in male representation around joy, is that there is much more joy when you see gay men represented, and there is very little joy when you see straight men represented. You might see, you know, oh yes, they've won the World Cup, or oh, my child's walking for the first time. But that kind of joy of community, that joy of friendship, that joy of being around your people, you don't see that. You don't see that in advertising. And so, again, that's something I'm trying to kind of push to the brands that we're working with to actually think more about that. So it's almost like bringing queer joy in, and we talk about queer joy a lot as well. And we talk about, you know, bring queer joy to everybody else. And I think that's obviously really, really important. Now, we do a lot of work around LGBT plus representation as well. And I just wanted to kind of show you some of that work, kind of in context of what I've just shown you. So some of the work that we do is we take the big data, and, you know, when you've got 830,000 global customers who are using you know, 100 million different images and videos a year, or then we can pretty much say that our data represents the world as it is. I would challenge anyone to come up with a bigger data set. In fact, I would love to see a bigger data set than what we currently have. So when we say something like less than 1% of visuals include someone from the LGBT community, we're pretty close to kind of, you know, percentage-wise what that global picture is. And there are issues with this in terms of well, first of all, we thought that we thought the world had become more inclusive. We've gone through a period where there's been a lot more interest in being inclusive, bringing diversity to advertising, but we're still kind of stuck on this 1%. I work in a lot of countries where it is actually dangerous and illegal to announce whether you're gay or not. So what I insist that we do with anyone we work with models especially, that there has to be consent before we label them as something. So you can't label somebody as being gay or transgender or anything other than being, a person, unless they have given the consent. Because for some people they're not out, for some people they don't want to be the representative for the community in the global space, but others they have. And when we work with kids, it's really amazing when their parents allow us to label them as such. So sorry. So the number is very, very small, but also there is that kind of not quite sure that that's incredibly accurate. And even within that 1%, we are stuck in stereotypes in the ad industry. So gay men tend to be more feminine. We see so many images of the rainbow flag. Oh my God, it's a lovely, jolly thing. It's gorgeous. It's fabulous to shoot. But it kind of brings us back to Pride again, and the association, again, back to Maddie's points, the association of Pride has become something kind of commercial and corporate because it's been appropriated by brands, and obviously that's something that we want to move on from. And then, you see kind of lesbian women are more masculine, gay men are more flamboyant. You see a lot more kind of marching, protesting, parades and parties. There's nothing about real life there. It's all kind of very, very surface level and stereotypical. And then when you kind of start to think about the transgender community, this is where we see even less representation. And again, we started doing work on the transgender community because we discovered, we work very closely with an organisation called GLAAD, who are an advocacy group based in the US. And they actually created a Netflix film about being transgender. And most, oh God, that video's gone all glitchy. Most transgender depiction were people by themselves. So inadvertently, brands were representing transgender, and they thought they were doing the right thing, but they were focusing in on them as isolated from society. And we make these connections without even realizing it. But when you start to bring somebody who's transgender into your office environment, and you kind of present them as part of society, part of the community, part of a team in a corporate business, then we start to move things forward. Then we start to kind of think about how we might do better in the future and create better imagery for brands and to represent the community. We found that interest in diversity and inclusion is declining. Now, the optimist in me is that people are, or at least our customers, are moving away from broad sweeping statements like, I cannot tell you how many photo briefs I've received that said, we need diversity. I want a diverse family. And so, I think, I like to think, the optimist in me thinks that it's because we are more sophisticated in our language and we have moved on. But the pessimist in me thinks that we are seeing this kind of anxiety because of the targeting of DE&I specifically in the US. And therefore what our customer base are doing are that they're thinking around it. They're not using that terminology because it's inflammatory for whatever reason, but are kind of being a little bit more guerrilla, a little bit more undercover in terms of how they're kind of choosing the content that they're using. We do see that there are kind of areas of opportunity for imagery in the commercial space, things around exercising and playing sports, you know, specifically with transgender representation, but also with the whole community. Genderqueer children are rarely pictured, and especially teens. Now, I would argue that even kind of cisgendered teens are very, very hard to photograph. They just do not want to be photographed. But very rarely are we able to shoot genderqueer children. And there is still kind of, you know, there's still too much joy in an LGBT expression, which I know sounds ironic, but it's all about the joy, in advertising at least, and not about all the other moments, all the huge range of emotions that we have as human beings. So again, I think it's really interesting in terms of what Maddie was talking about earlier. And then, you know, just trying to capture the entire intersection, I suppose, of LGBT life, and you know, whether that's, you know, thinking about race and ethnicity, whether it's thinking about religion and culture and body shape, and, you know, all of the identities that bisect where your sexual orientation is. So in terms of kind of how we're developing this content further, and this work continues, you know, we adapt our captions, we adapt our search terms depending on how the kind of the language is evolving. And we, you know, this work continues despite the fact that we are an American company and we are getting a lot of pressure from the US government. It's not something that we're kind of stepping back from, because we, you know, I feel, my entire team feels that it's really important to not, you know, not go back. We are, you know, focusing in on transgender visibility in particular, making sure that the type of content that we create is real, is kind of everyday, is about relationships and friendships and again the broad range of emotions. Also, you know, again, as I quite mentioned before, transgender visibility for the younger generations in order to again allow the young people as they come up and they start to see this imagery that it's not something that you should hide away behind closed doors with. Intersectional experiences, I've already mentioned that. So this is, again, this work has been going on for a number of years now, but it's still it's a place that a lot of brands are not willing to go. So creating beautiful images and really kind of trying to push it towards our customers is kind of part of what we're doing. Similarly with disability as well, this is kind of cropped here, but this lady is a wheelchair user, and a glorious, colourful woman with that. We're thinking about kind of gay relationships that are not your classic kind of twinky young men, you know, who are beautiful and perfect, you know, perfect bodies and things, but actually larger body types in particular, and, you know, different ethnicities as well. I think that's really, really important when we're thinking about couples. And then, yeah, similar here, actually, this is a women's couple, and very, very key. This is kind of, you know, a big area. As I say, this is a big area for us in terms of research, is bringing all of that work into the workplace and shooting it in a way that's really attractive, not necessarily labeling it as this is a transgender person in the workplace, but this is a creative team in the workplace, so that brands use the content and it goes up and we see it around the world, and we're kind of, you know, we're sharing this in the global marketplace in a way that perhaps the brand won't necessarily feel as comfortable with unless it's a, you know, a stunning image. And finally, this is a kind of guidebook that we've created with GLAD, and it's, you know, how it kind of gives anyone who's creating content some tips on how to avoid stereotypes and how to kind of move visualization on, how to think about, you know, how you might kind of depict this, you know, depict the community in all its diversity. And again, I must kind of really emphasize that without doing harm. And I think that's the last slide, actually. Yes. So yeah, like I say, a bit of an odd start, but I just wanted to kind of give you a sense of how we're thinking about gender expression, sexual orientation, as it connects back to kind of binary genders. And, you know, a lot of the work I do is thinking about how to present this work in a new way to get the media, especially thinking about gender and you know, non-binary genders represented in a way that perhaps they haven't thought about before. So if you kind of go into, a conversation with a journalist or a corporate brand talking about the depictions of men, then they're like, oh, this is interesting, because usually it's a man. I'm a man, and this is really important to me, and I want to be depicted in a realistic way. And then you're like, okay, let's just have a look at how we're depicting other genders, and let's see how we're depicting the LGBT community, and let's think about, let's have a moment to think about how they feel about how they're depicted. And that's usually, you know, a great way to get conversation started. And that's kind of, you know, obviously what we're trying to do as a business, and also, you know, what we're trying to do as an industry as well. So that's me. Very quick.